It's never really a happy experience talking about death on the scale that I've just outlined. I take it from a perspective looking in very broad terms, the 1920s, the 1930s, the 1940s. Soviet scholars will go through those decades and talk about the peaks and the troughs, the purges, and you'll be welcome to follow up in your own time. Now, I want to go back to the idea of image and overlay, and how much the way the Soviet Union presented itself to the wider world, to its domestic population, was tried to actually gloss over some of its excesses to give a belief in a better way forward. Now, certainly during Stalin's life, there was a committed population who, having lived underneath the Tsar, almost took the line that anything was better. However, propaganda by the Bolsheviks and the Communist Party of the Soviet Union was portrayed in a consistent way over the period of Stalin's life, as I mentioned. And I just want to draw attention to, again, David King's work, in this case, his book, Red Star over Russia, and just focus on the way that Lenin is portrayed. Now, this is, at least beginning with, the images of Lenin at the Finland station. And as you can see, there is a consistent pose with the open hand, welcoming, trying to engage the population more widely, giving direction to Soviet society, which is repeated, whether it be on top of an armoured car, a large bust, a stylized mural, or again, a poster. And we can actually find that again in terms of another pose in the different direction, but in this case giving greater leadership and direction again. It is the same pose repeated, including the very stylized image at the bottom here. We flip over, we go back to the Finland station image once more, or slightly modified. This is a variation of, these are 6 variations on a photograph by Goldstein. And again, it is the open hand, it is giving guidance, and Lenin's image as being critical to the direction of society as it goes through. So I think this is quite an important way of considering that Soviet society may have not provided the same level of consumption or well-being to the population as was seen in Britain or even America in the Great Depression. But one of the things that you need to consider is that commitment to a better future through the propaganda, offering a better future, offering goals through the Communist Party and their imagery helped reinforce the rule of the Soviet hierarchy. In terms of broader propaganda, where leaders are positioned next to each other is quite an important issue within Soviet propaganda. And we talked about this in the opening session of the course, looking in the modern era on how politicians would be digitally removed from one position and placed in another, so that their position at the shoulder of great leaders was emphasized. The same is true within the Soviet Union. And again, here are 2 photographs, two representations of banners. One giving Stalin amongst the people, suggesting that he is a man of the people. And secondly, Stalin juxtaposed next to Lenin, but also with Marx and Engels there. So that what is put forward is, if you like, a retconned view of Stalin's rise, that he was central to the development of Soviet ideology and leadership. That was far from the case. Certainly in the way that Stalin moved forward, certainly in the way that Stalin moved the Soviet Union forward, what we are looking at more than anything is the degree of control, not an ideological commitment, which is his important contribution to the way that the Soviet Union developed. Just as banners and posters were an important part of the Soviet leadership's propaganda tools, so were the 1930s show trials. If you like, making clear to the public that those who dissented would be punished and to go through what appeared to be a judicial process. It was more for public consumption. Now, here we've got a photograph which starts to deal with an issue we're going to come back to a little bit later. This photograph in 1935 shows Stalin with a group of Soviet leaders, yet you can just about pick out that 4 of them have had their faces scrawled out of this particular photograph. It's not done subtly. It is an indication that these people, having been in Stalin's trust, slowly moved out, and being moved out of that trust were then purged and, if you like, were fed to the dogs in giving the public indications of what happens to those who fail to commit to the loyalty that Stalin required. Now, to think about another way of putting that into context, here are 2 presentations of the Soviet Union. One which is a very striking and bold image, long live Stalin, the first marshal of communism, and again what looks like a tourist guide. In fact, it is a tourist guide for the Soviet Union, very stylized, but something that you might see elsewhere. So the contrast between what was shown for internal consumption in a positive light and what was shown in a negative light do contrast really quite greatly. For Stalin, being seen as a great leader on the world stage was important, and these images indicate the degree of, quotes, cooperation that was put forward between the British, the Americans and the Soviet Union against the common foe in Adolf Hitler and Nazi Germany. Now, one of the recurring themes in discussions between Stalin, Churchill and Roosevelt during the 1940s was when a Western Front would be opened up. I think given the loss of life of the Soviet Union on the Eastern Front, that's understandable, to dilute and stretch the Soviet forces across Europe. Winston Churchill, very politely, so to speak, decided to forget about the Ribbentrop, von Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact of 1939, which saw Poland divided by both Germany and the Soviet Union in a non-aggression pact against each other. I think Churchill particularly was prepared to view his enemy's enemy as a friend at this point in time. So while we have these strongly patriotic and reinforcing images, one of the things you've got to bear in mind is this is propaganda, the politics behind it were far more complex, but it's what's presented to the Soviet public and again, to a certain degree, what's shown to the public more widely. We're going to come back to the way that Stalin's image and its use was changed over time. But this is, again, another propaganda image from 1953, him lying in state and in an almost semi-tropical environment with a number of flowers and leaves around him. So the idea of veneration in death and the respect that's shown in this photograph is something that those who had direct contact with Stalin and his regime might have found a little bit ironic, considering the number of people who were not treated with the same respect in their own deaths. What we have is a number of David King's works here looking at revolutionary posters, and I want to extend the idea that how the power of image in the Soviet Union carried across. So if you consider my comments regarding the wartime alliance, it's very clear from this particular poster, a very anti-capitalist view, that it's a stylized view of France, America and Great Britain as effectively bags of money, rather than being human beings, overlooking the distress of the Soviet Union. So again, time of war, time of winning hearts and minds, bringing people together towards a common purpose. What we have is a different use of imagery, from the three flags to here the three bloated capitalists. Another important point of Soviet imagery is the idea of collective effort. So in many of the propaganda posters, you see ordinary people contributing. In these two posters, workers holding flags, but it's the farmer, it's the engineer, it's the militiaman. What we're actually seeing here is an embodiment of Soviet goals about the role of the individual in part of a collective struggle. And if you like, it's eulogizing the importance of the individual, even though the way the Soviet Union was run and operated was very much from the top down. Once more, in terms of the iconography almost of Lenin, here we have another poster from 1924. He is in a similar pose to those that I indicated before. You have the industrialization of Soviet Union in the background, but nevertheless he's pointing forward. He is leading the country in a consistent manner. As well as the positive images, we need to talk about how the enemies of the state were characterized. These posters indicate those who were the wreckers, the counter-revolutionaries, again, horribly caricatured, and also the idea of the rich peasant, the idea that farmers within the Soviet Union were to a certain degree taking advantage of the leeway of the new economic policy, and while they were fulfilling their quotas, they were also making profits for themselves. These who were not complying with the broad view of Stalinist of Stalinist rule even, are portrayed in extremely negative lights. Quite an important aspect of the way that the Soviet Union was portrayed was in terms of modernity, the Soviet Union moving forward. These two posters pick up very well the idea that aircraft and production of in that sphere moves the Soviet Union on from its older peasant traditions, if you like, its pre-revolutionary legacy, and it is now in the forefront of technological change. So what can the Soviet Union develop, and what can it offer? Well, the way that these composite posters are put together, certainly in the 1930s, a better future than possibly was seen in the West in the aftermath of the Great Depression. And again, in terms of the position of the leader, something which is very much a composite picture, quite stylized in some respects, but Stalin at the center, being applauded by the population, but in the background, almost giving approval, you have the image of Lenin almost overlooking what Stalin retconned himself to be, his protege, which is hardly the case in the period immediately after the revolution. Let's just look at two more images, both coming through in the war and post-war period. The first one showing Stalin as, again, most prominent under the CCCP symbol, but with all those beneath him holding a similar pose, as if there is a commonality of purpose. And beyond that, we have a very stylized view where, again, you have Stalin on the red flag matched against a picture of Lenin, a statue of Lenin. And this is looking at the 30th anniversary of the Russian Revolution. Once more, it is important that Stalin is seen to be in proximity to Lenin and figuratively to have his blessing. Here's another poster which shows the importance of Stalin's proximity to Lenin. Here, Stalin is central. You have those around him appearing to give support, and again, over his shoulder is Lenin looking on, we assume, approvingly. And for a larger poster, again, you have the great theoretical leaders of the Russian Revolution. Stalin is in the picture along with Lenin, Marx and Engels. So while this is a very rapid and somewhat stylized view of the way that imagery was used in the Soviet Union, you can see that they're very bold and compelling images, either very positively or very negatively, depending on the stance of the Soviet Union at the time. And this is why I think, just to counterpoint what we're going to be doing next, the concern that Stalin had about his image in the population and the success of the Soviet Union, this might explain to a certain degree how the poster images and these stylized images then move through to the changed actual images.